Champagne gets popped open at weddings, New Year's countdowns, and championship celebrations, treated as the ultimate symbol of intentional, joyful luxury. The drink you reach for specifically because something has gone right. The popular legend even claims a blind monk discovered it by accident and cried out to his fellow brothers, "Come quickly, I am tasting the stars." Almost none of that beloved legend is actually true, and the real documented history is stranger and considerably less romantic than the story printed on gift boxes and tourist plaques. The bubbles inside champagne started life as a defect, something generations of winemakers spent decades desperately trying to eliminate rather than create, and the man usually credited with inventing the drink may have spent his entire career actively trying to destroy the very thing that made his name immortal. This is the real history of Champagne. The Champagne region of northeastern France had been producing genuinely respected still wine for centuries before anyone associated it with bubbles at all. The problem, if you can even call it that at the time, came down entirely to the region's brutally cold winters, colder than most other French wine-growing regions further south. When temperatures dropped low enough each autumn, the fermentation process happening inside a barrel or freshly sealed bottle would appear to grind to a complete stop, and winemakers, seeing no more activity, would cork their bottles, believing the entire job was finished and the wine was ready. But the yeast responsible for fermentation inside that bottle wasn't actually dead at all. It was simply dormant, sitting completely inactive through the freezing winter months, patiently waiting for warmer temperatures to return. When spring finally arrived and the cellar warmed back up, that dormant yeast would spring back to life inside the already sealed bottle, triggering an unplanned secondary fermentation that produced carbon dioxide gas with absolutely nowhere at all to escape. The pressure that built up inside those sealed glass bottles was genuinely, seriously dangerous, not simply an inconvenient fizz. Winemakers of the era gave the phenomenon a suitably dramatic name, vin du diable, the devil's wine, because bottles would frequently explode without any warning at all, sending sharp glass shards flying across entire storage cellars and destroying neighboring bottles in a violent chain reaction that could wipe out an entire season's stock in minutes. Some especially bad years reportedly saw cellar workers lose well over half their entire inventory to these random, unpredictable explosions, and the rare fizzy wine that occasionally survived intact through bottling and storage was still considered spoiled, faulty, and genuinely unsellable by the exacting standards of serious winemakers at the time. Here's where the popular legend gets things badly, almost comically wrong. According to the version most people have heard repeated for generations, a Benedictine monk named Dom Pérignon accidentally discovered sparkling wine sometime in the late 1600s at the Abbey of Hautevillers and was overjoyed by what he'd stumbled onto, immediately recognizing genius in what everyone else considered a ruined batch. In reality, an English scientist named Christopher Merritt had already presented a detailed, formal paper to London's Royal Society back in 1662, describing precisely how deliberately adding extra sugar to wine before bottling could induce a controlled, intentional secondary fermentation and produce genuine bubbles entirely on purpose, That paper was published and publicly presented 6 full years before Dom Pérignon even arrived at Haut-Villers to begin his own work there as a young monk. By any honest reading of the surviving documentation, England, not France, holds the strongest and earliest documented claim to intentionally engineering sparkling wine in the first place, decades before the French legend even begins. Dom Pérignon was, at least, a genuine historical figure, and he did spend the majority of his adult life working as cellar master at Haut-Villers. But the actual records that survive from his career tell a strikingly different story than the popular myth suggests. Rather than chasing after the bubbles or celebrating their arrival, Dom Pérignon spent enormous, sustained effort trying to eliminate them entirely, viewing the fizzy defect as something actively ruining otherwise excellent, carefully crafted wine. He focused his real energy instead on genuinely valuable innovations that had nothing to do with carbonation at all, becoming among the first winemakers in the region to successfully produce pale white wine from dark-skinned black grape varieties like Pinot Noir, and developing careful blending techniques across different vineyard plots that remain standard practice throughout the Champagne region even today. When Dom Pérignon finally died in 1715, a formal monastic inventory of the abbey's cellars carefully recorded exactly how much sparkling wine remained anywhere in his personal possession. The documented answer was 0. Not one single bottle. What that inventory actually found instead was hundreds of barrels filled with completely ordinary red and white still wine, the genuine product he had dedicated his entire career to perfecting. If you're enjoying stories like this, hit subscribe now. This channel digs up hidden histories exactly like this one every single week. So where did the beloved Tasting the Stars story actually come from, if not from Dom Pérignon himself? The tale first appeared in writing in 1821, over a full century after Dom Pérignon's death, told by a different Benedictine monk entirely, a man named Dom Groussard, in an account that historians have since studied closely for its accuracy. Most historians who've examined the origin now believe it was a deliberately embellished piece of early marketing, crafted specifically to boost the prestige and sales of an entirely separate abbey's wine business, more than 100 years after the fact, and with no direct connection to Haut-Villers at all. The charming, romantic legend simply latched onto Champagne's already growing international fame and stuck there permanently, repeated so consistently across the following 2 centuries, in guidebooks, advertisements, and casual conversation alike, that most people today simply assume it's straightforward historical fact, rather than a clever piece of 19th century marketing invention. Despite winemakers' best efforts to eliminate it, the fizzy, flawed wine slowly found its own fans anyway. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, French royalty and the broader European aristocracy had developed a genuine taste for the novelty of sparkling wine, treating the unpredictable bubbles as exciting rather than embarrassing. Demand grew steadily throughout the 1700s, even though the underlying technical problems were still nowhere close to solved. Bottles kept exploding at alarming rates well into the 1800s, and even the sparkling wine that survived bottling intact often came out cloudy, filled with dead yeast sediment that most drinkers found genuinely unappealing to look at, let alone drink. The real technical breakthrough finally arrived in 1818, and once again, it had almost nothing to do with any monk at all, mythical or otherwise. A young widow named Barbe Nicole Ponsardin, known to history simply as Madame or Veuve Clicquot, had taken over her late husband's struggling wine business at just 27 years old, an almost unheard of position of authority for a woman to hold in early 19th century France, where widows were generally expected to quietly hand control to male relatives. Working closely alongside her cellar master, a man named Antoine Muller, Clicquot devised a genuinely ingenious solution to the cloudy sediment problem that had frustrated champagne producers across the entire region for well over a century, a defect that left even successfully bottled sparkling wine looking murky and unappetizing. She had holes drilled at a careful angle directly into an ordinary kitchen table, allowing sealed bottles to be inserted neck down and gradually rotated by hand over a period of several weeks. Gravity slowly pulled the unwanted yeast sediment down into the narrow neck of each bottle, where it could finally be removed cleanly in one quick motion, leaving behind a genuinely clear, brilliant, sparkling wine for the very first time in the drink's entire history. This process, which became known throughout the industry as riddling, single-handedly transformed champagne from an unpredictable, often embarrassing, regional curiosity into a genuinely reliable, internationally exportable luxury product worth serious money. Riddling caught on rapidly across the entire Champagne region once rival producers learned of Clicquot's technique and rushed to copy it for themselves. In 1864, a specialized wooden rack called the pupitre was formally patented, capable of holding well over 100 bottles at once during the lengthy riddling process, dramatically improving efficiency at scale. By 1889, a further refinement standardized exactly how those racked bottles should be rotated and angled for the most consistent results possible. Glass-making technology improved dramatically alongside these innovations too, finally producing bottles strong enough to reliably survive the internal pressure of secondary fermentation without shattering, closing the book once and for all on centuries of exploding glass and ruined cellars. Today, the name champagne is legally protected under both French and international law, meaning only sparkling wine produced within that specific, narrowly defined region of northeastern France, using these exact inherited techniques passed down since Clicquot's kitchen table experiment, is legally permitted to carry the name at all anywhere in the world. It stands today as one of the single most recognizable symbols of celebration and luxury on the entire planet, instantly associated with weddings, victories, and milestone achievements everywhere from Paris to Los Angeles. And yet, the entire drink traces its actual documented origin story back to an overlooked English scientist's academic paper, a monk who genuinely spent his career trying to eliminate the very bubbles that eventually made his name immortal centuries after his death, and a young widow who solved the technical problem nobody else in the industry could crack, using nothing more sophisticated than a borrowed kitchen table and a handful of carefully drilled holes. So the next time a cork pops at a celebration and everyone in the room cheers at that satisfying sound, remember what that exact sound genuinely used to mean inside a French monastery cellar centuries ago. Not celebration, not luxury, not romance. A bottle failing catastrophically, glass flying dangerously through the dark, and a monk working somewhere else in that very same building, actively and sincerely trying to make absolutely certain it never happened again. If this surprised you, subscribe for more hidden histories behind the everyday objects and drinks you never think twice about. Next time, we're uncovering the accidental discovery that came from a chocolate bar melting in the wrong man's pocket.